Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. We've got a big show for you today. We're going to do salary cap is the primary segment. Talk about where the team's at today, where the team could potentially get to as far as generating cap space. Take a look at some of the roster decisions that the Seahawks are going to have to make with their own free agents under contract and those that are unrestricted. And we'll kind of highlight, I think, the decisions around the quarterback position for Seattle. That'll be one of the big discussions that we need to have. And we'll start the show kind of looking at the current coaching search, how that's going, and if there's any news, any non-news, we'll talk about it. So how you doing, Keith? Welcome in.
Doing good. Coaching search is slow, but interesting. They finished round one. They started round two. The names that have been included in round two are the ones whose teams have lost. And the names who are not included in round two are the teams who are still playing, the coaches of teams who are still playing. So, has anything changed at all?
I don't think anything's really changed. And if you really boil it down, and a lot of decisions across the NFL are starting to be made. In fact, just before we pushed record, the head coaching job there for the Chargers was taken by Jim Harbaugh, coming back into the NFL from Michigan.
Right. I'm surprised with that. I'm surprised that he would come back to an organization that is run by Spanos and is really cheap. And there's going to be complications there. And I'm kind of surprised that he's coming back to the NFL, just weeks after winning a national championship at Michigan.
Yeah. And they wanted to give him big money to stay.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I thought for sure he was going to go back at least for another year. He would wait until they didn't win a title and then leave. And I didn't expect him to leave to the Chargers. It's just not a match I would have predicted given Spanos as their owner. So very interesting matchup. I got to tell you, he'll make San Diego better. He'll make San Diego better instantly.
Los Angeles.
Whatever. No, it's the Chargers. They're still in San Diego. No, you're right. It's LA Chargers, but it's the
I get it. That rumor though for him to go into the NFL and be at the Chargers was something that was a thing right from the very beginning. Really, he didn't interview for many other positions. I don't think he might have had an introductory interview with Atlanta, but I think more or less it was the Chargers all the way, and he wanted to be on the West Coast, wanted to be in LA, and he's got it. So we'll see how it works. He's got a great quarterback to work with, and he kind of makes it work wherever he's at. So we'll see. Time will tell. The thing I can appreciate about the search in Seattle is that John Schneider is going through the process. And he's not just winging it and doing it in namesake only. He's actually really going through it. And he's taking his time. And I think he can take his time because some of these decisions have been made already. Callahan's been hired. A couple other coaching decisions have been made. Really, it comes down to Washington and Seattle left on the table as far as head coaching positions available. And Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick, Mike Vrabel, Dan Quinn, Mike McDonald, Patrick Graham, Raheem Morris, all still on the table. I think John feels like he's still going to be able to get his guy, maybe the top two choices that he has. He's going to get one of those. And so he's able to kind of just take his time, go through the process, really learn all that he can learn from these guys about different teams, different processes, guys, how they would build their coaching staffs, And John has already stated that he would be involved in some of that process. And so I think it's just really important that he does. I know it's difficult as a fan and for us to sit back with really no information coming out to kind of wait for something to just all of a sudden pop. But that seems like that's the way it's going to go. I will say, out of all these names, you can add Evero, to that list. Mike Vrabel, maybe, but I wouldn't rule out like defensive coordinator from the Raiders, Patrick Graham. I'm starting to hear some chatter about this, Keith, and I just saw you roll your eyes a little bit, and hear me out.
That would be such an awful transition.
I don't know that it necessarily would be, and I would encourage you to kind of check out Patrick Graham a little bit more closely, because Yale graduate, simply brilliant, runs brilliant schemes.
Don't
very much
care.
Hold on, dude. Hold on. Could end up being one of the best Seahawks coaches ever. You never know. The reason I say that they're probably likely really strongly looking at him. I guess according to an insider with insider knowledge, he knocked his first interview out of the park, and he's a team builder. He's a guy that players really love playing for. He's a tactician, which I think that they need, a guy that really knows how to counterpunch and draws up plans. He's very schematically has a lot of variable, so that he can run 4-3, 3-4, kind of that hybrid thing that Pete tried to do but wasn't successful at. In the last 8-9 weeks of the season, Keith, he had that Raiders defense ranked number 1 in the NFL overall in points and yardage allowed. And I think he's a name to keep track of. I'm not saying he's got the job. I'm not saying he's my favorite. I'm just saying this is a guy to be taken seriously in this process, and I don't think we've really talked about him at all.
I just say, if he's the guy, you fired Pete Carroll for who? A guy who's got 2 years as a defensive coordinator.
You can say that almost about anybody, though, Keith.
One of those years was awful. And one of those years was bad at the beginning, and then they turned it around. They have underperformed their talent for 3/4 of his tenure as a defensive coordinator. And only the most recent quarter season have they played well for him.
He's only been the DC there the last 10 games after McDonald was gone, and their current interim coach was their defensive coordinator. So Patrick Graham got promoted into that spot halfway through this season.
He was in a similar role. But being a head coach is not being the tactician. Being a head coach is about being the leader, being the motivator, being the teacher.
Yeah. And he's very good at it.
Your X's and O's guys are your coordinators. He is a coordinator. And until he can show more than
and so
10
is Ben
games
Johnson, and so is Bobby
success,
Slowick. So is Mike McDonald. All those guys have never
and they
been
have
a head coach.
They have more experience as a coordinator, and they have experience as a coordinator for good teams, good programs, good cultures. They've at least seen it done right. Graham has half a season of watching a really bad organization.
He's very well thought of around the league. I'm just saying, you go check him out. I mean, just here's my ask.
Clint Hurt was well thought of.
Go do the due diligence on Patrick Graham for me, and then come back and tell me how you really feel, because I get the visceral feeling of
you fire Pete freaking Carroll.
Here's the deal.
And then you hire Graham?
So many players, so many of these names you could say that for. You could say, oh my God, they fired Pete Carroll for Ben Johnson or Bobby Slowick. Who?
You could say those that are things. Good at their job and have been doing it for at least a couple of years.
Yeah,
Graham's done it for 10 games.
The average fan, the average fan is not going to know who those guys are.
I'm not talking about the average fan. I'm talking to you. You're going to fire Pete Carroll and then hire a guy that's been a coordinator for 10 games.
Don't kill the messenger, buddy. Don't kill the messenger.
No,
I'm saying is I'm bringing up Patrick Graham's name because it's starting to become a name that is circulating in this search that is gaining a little bit of traction with some inside reporting that said the first meeting went very, very well. And so I have to pay attention to that. And that's why I'm bringing it up. No, he's not my first choice. I'd love to see Ben Johnson or Bobby Slowick. Yes. Mike McDonald, probably my third choice. Dan Quinn in that conversation. Mike Vrabel. Yes. Two coaches that have the experience, that have the culture. Patrick Graham, probably lower on the list, but I'm just saying he's a guy that we need to start paying attention to.
Patrick Graham isn't going to have a job in a week at all.
He could be a defensive coordinator for the guy that we bring in. Trust me, dude. This guy's an up-and-comer. He's going to be a head coach in the NFL. Go check it out.
Great for him, but he doesn't have to be Seattle's head coach next year. He won't have a job a week from now. When the Raiders hire their coach.
If we hire Ben Johnson or Bobby Slowick, Patrick Graham could very well be one of the best choices for defensive coordinator that this team could make.
Absolutely. That would be awesome. I would love that. If you go hire Ben Johnson and then you get Graham as your defensive coordinator, that is a successful coaching search. Tell me, the Raiders are not considering Graham for their head coaching job.
Antonio Pierce was selected. So yes, that is correct. And Antonio Pierce would like to retain Patrick Graham as their defensive coordinator.
But they did not consider Patrick Graham he wasn't even.
That's because Antonio Pierce had already basically got the job.
He was never considered at any point.
That is correct.
And they know him better than anyone. Why is Seattle going, wow, this is a guy we have to
Because
hire?
I think Seattle is legitimately trying to do their due diligence on all the really good, young, talented play callers in this league that are tacticians to see if they have the leadership qualities you're looking for in a head coach. Nobody knows if Ben Johnson can be a head coach. That's why they're going through the interview process to see if he's got those abilities, that he's learned some things from where he's been, that he can put those sorts of administrative duties to work. Nobody knows about Mike McDonald. Is he going to be a good head coach? He's certainly a good defensive coordinator. That's all we know. That same thing could be said for Patrick Graham. You know, he's a coordinator. If you check him out, I think you'll come away knowing that Patrick Graham is at least a really good defensive coordinator and a good tactician. I don't know if he's a good head coach. I don't know that.
I can't even grant you that he's a good defensive coordinator.
I can't either until you go look and gather some more information.
Here's the thing. Go gather information. He's had that title for 10 games. Now he had game planning responsibilities. But not play calling responsibilities for the previous year and a half before that. And the defense wasn't great. It wasn't really good when he was involved in game planning, but not play calling. I can't tell you that he was a good tactician.
That was a highly dysfunctional. Now, I will grant you a couple of things. That was a highly dysfunctional organization, as you know.
Yeah, so that's the only form of an organization that he's ever seen at a manager level.
While McDaniels was there. But when he was ditched, now they still struggled on offense because they just don't have a roster. But their defense, Keith, was a $40 million defense. That roster was constructed. So Max Crosby was their only player on defense, right? He was making $20 million. The rest of their defense combined was making $40 million. That was a $40 million defense. And it was number one in the NFL when Patrick Graham was coordinator. That's all.
Yeah, that was also they played some of the worst teams in the league over that stretch. And again, he's only been a coordinator for 10 games. Why are you hiring him?
Yeah, and I will say this, anytime you step away from Pete Carroll, you're stepping down. You just are. It's like if we hire Ben Johnson, you're going to go from Pete Carroll to Ben Johnson, a guy that's never been a head coach in the NFL in his life, right? I mean, that's just the reality. Is like no matter who we select, it's going to be someone that has less to bring to the table than Pete Carroll does. I mean, you're talking about one of the best of all time.
Do you remember when Washington signed Jim Zorn away from Seattle? Jim Zorn was Seattle's quarterback
as head coach. Yeah.
And they signed him to be the offensive coordinator. And then a week and a half went by and they'd gotten turned down by a couple of head coaches that they tried to hire. And finally they go, we're just going to promote Jim Zorn. He's going to be our head coach.
Uh-huh.
Welcome to Daniel Graham, who has basically just skipped the coordinator level.
You know, by now, 7 years, almost 8 years into this, I love you, man. I do. And that is some hyperbole on the royal level.
How?
Because Keith, come on, you're comparing something that's not even comparable.
It's two guys that are jumping from non-coordinator positions into head coach positions. He was an interim defensive coordinator for half a season.
I started this conversation. I'm going to end this conversation by saying that John Schneider is doing an amazing job going through the process of just having conversations and bringing, I think, guys in that should excite fans in a way, because it's not just Mike Vrabel coming in or just Dan Quinn. Those are established guys. We know what those guys are going to bring to the table. I think John might be leaning towards trying to figure out a way to bring one of these young guys into this organization and surround him in a cocoon of culture that will help bring success, and see if he can get like one of these innovators to come in that can compete in the NFC West against Sean McVay and the other coaches in this division. And, you know, I'd love for it to be Ben Johnson. I think that would be a great home run hit. I wasn't leaning that way at first, but the more I've thought about it, the more I'd be okay with it, because, you know, it's going to be a crapshoot no matter what. Dan Quinn's going to be a crapshoot. Mike Vrabel, Ben Johnson, Mike McDonald, Patrick Graham. Okay. It's either going to work or it isn't. And you might as well just go for it. So I like the idea that John is really going through the process and he's having conversations. And one of these young guys, whether it's Raheem Morris or Patrick Graham or Mike McDonald, Slowick, man, he could really just knock John's socks off and just go, wow, I wasn't expecting this guy to be like ready, but he's ready and I'm going to give him a shot. And I'm okay with that. I mean, if I trust that process. And so I think, you know, if Patrick Graham had a great interview and just completely blew it out, I'm happy for the guy, and we'll see what happens in round 2. I know that he's got round 2. He's part of the round 2.
I don't know if you've ever hired and been on that side. Some people interview really well, and then
that's very true.
Then they are ass when they start the job, and then there are some people who stumble through their interview, but they come up big. I don't give a damn if they
well, how do you know that ahead of time?
You don't. That's the problem. But with you got Dan Quinn, you got a Super Bowl coach. You have a Super Bowl coach. It's not really a crapshoot when he's already done the job and had success.
Yeah, Mike Vrabel's been to the AFC Championship game.
Yeah, with a crappy roster. No offensive.
Yeah, both those guys. What I'm saying is both those guys are guys I wouldn't have an issue with necessarily. And it would be more of a sure thing, I think, for John. John, his job's on the line. I would think if you go with a Dan Quinn or Mike Vrabel, you're more likely to retain like a Geno Smith. We can talk about that in a minute as we transition over to salary cap stuff. Because I think those guys want kind of a sure-handed thing to have a quarterback help that transition process with a young team, and you draft a guy and you kind of build around that, but you have a bridge. I think Geno's perfect for that if they can figure out the contract stuff. If you go with a Ben Johnson or a Mike McDonald, I don't know that it's necessarily advantageous to have a guy like Geno Smith. I think that
Ben Johnson made Jared Goff look like a pro
that is
bowler.
true, Keith. That is very true.
He can make anybody look good. He could probably sign someone off the street and have them look like a competent quarterback.
So we dished a lot on Jared Goff before he went to
just
Detroit, and now you're dishing him.
Funny. But he has actually played really well this year.
He has. I gotta take my hat off to him.
Yeah, he's played really well, and so for those of you listening that haven't been with us for 7 years, Jared Goff was terrible, and we called him out on it, but he's played really well, and he deserves credit for that. And so the joke here is, he made Jared Goff look good. He did make Jared Goff look good, but some of that credit needs to go to Jared Goff as well, who's the kid's put in the work.
I think that the big thing here is there's really no news other than this is a process that's not going to resolve overnight. It's probably going to either be this next week, or if it's a guy like Mike McDonald, defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens, who could end up being in the Super Bowl. It could be after the Super Bowl before they have a chance to really sit down and interview a guy like Mike McDonald. And if he's gone through a couple of Zoom interviews with them and he's their guy, they would be okay with waiting if they had kind of an agreement in hand before an in-person interview. So we'll see how this stretches out.
When Atlanta hired Dan Quinn, it wasn't until after the Super Bowl, but he was already assembling a staff. These things happen. They do.
Yeah.
There's also no rush. Dan Quinn. Ben Johnson is not available to hire. His team is still playing.
Yes.
Right? McDonald, his team is still playing. There's no rush because the best guys might not be available to you yet. I think the longer this goes, the more it points to one of those guys and not a guy that is available like Dan Quinn and Mike Vrabel.
Agreed.
So what do you think of the Dan Quinn Chip Kelly marriage that got rumored this last week?
You don't really want to know what I think, Keith. Why don't you tell me what you think? I don't think much about it, really.
I think, okay, one, it's absurd. I mean, I can understand Kelly wanting to come back to the NFL and prove he could do it. I can understand him looking for an out at UCLA after going 8-5. And if he has another off year, he might be gone, especially now that they're a Big Ten school with Big Ten money. And so, looking for a soft landing that way. But why would you do that if you're Dan Quinn?
And why would you do that if you're Chip Kelly? Honestly, I mean, an offensive coordinator in the NFL is not going to make $10 million plus a year, which is where Chip Kelly's at in college football. He's making six? Oh, okay.
UCLA.
Yeah, so he's probably going to make 4 in the NFL as an offensive coordinator. Maybe there's money enough there if Dan Quinn can convince ownership that he's worth it to have like a dream team come together. I personally don't see it. I don't know that offensive style that Chip Kelly has and brings did not work the first time. And I wouldn't want to be the experiment the second time around.
Well, I will say that if you watch the offense that they ran in UCLA, it was not the offense that he ran in Oregon and Philadelphia. He has evolved. I still don't care. I think it's funny that that's got thrown out there. I don't think
I do
it's meaningful.
too. And I think it was kind of a junior guy reporter that kind of threw that out there. I really do think that that's somewhat of a speculation thing, maybe some sort of hint of truth where Chip said something at some point, but I don't know that these arrangements are preordained like that. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so we're here for the salary cap. We've already recorded about 25 minutes.
Yeah, but we needed to argue about Daniel Graham, damn it.
I'm glad I had that, because I mean, I honestly, I really do think you should check him out just a little bit to kind of to see what I'm talking about. Seahawks are currently underwater on their salary cap. That doesn't really mean anything at all. It just means that by the time that they carried over from 2023 and they've got allocated cap numbers plugged in, we're upside down by about $4.4 million. Effective cap space is more like about $9 million. And we're going to have to solve that. So before the league year starts, March 18th, we'll need to be in compliance. And
okay, so all of that is completely true in terms of real cap space.
Yes.
That is not true in terms of off-season cap space. They, at the current moment, right now, this very second, need to clear $4,027 off the cap to be in compliance for the first day of the league year. Because only the top 51 contracts count. Correct. None of the projected rookies or projected practice squad, or actually the entire roster all the way to 90 men, none of that counts at this stage. Only the top 51 contracts. They have to cut 4,000. Now, they still need a 90-man roster. They still need to pay the rookies. They still need to pay the practice squad. They still need to get under the cap when all of these things count. But the deadline isn't March 1st. It's Tuesday before the first week of the season.
Okay. So thank you for the clarification on that. So really, I think the outcome of this conversation is going to be, we don't need to really completely worry about the cap space right now. And Seattle has the ability to generate about as much cap space as they need in order to put a roster together in 2024. So all of that is true. And we've talked about it previously that we can generate pretty easily anywhere from $40 million to $60 million, depending on the decision on Geno Smith. We can have that conversation momentarily. The other money, it comes from making some cuts to players, using some June 1st designation, specifically either on Adams or Diggs, to take advantage of that, to add an additional, what it was, $8 or $10 million to the 2024 cap by pushing it out another year. So they can get to about 40. We'll have to replace those players, but those are players that we don't want back for a reason. We're going to replace those guys anyway with probably younger and cheaper talent. So let's talk about Geno Smith to just get that nut out of the way.
There's a lot going on there. If you, the savings that you get if you were to just cut Geno Smith today would be $13.8 million. Is that something that you can get a replacement for? Now, you and I disagree on that in terms of our evaluation of Geno. But if all you're doing is replacing him and you're spending $14 million to do it, why would you cut him?
Well, because that's not his true cap number in 2024. If he's plays.
But that's the cap savings. So if the dead money you're paying Geno plus whatever you pay, let's say they pay Ryan Tannehill for $14 million, you're still paying your quarterback $31 million in cap space. Some of it's going to Geno and some of it's going to Tannehill.
Correct.
But you're still using the cap space that way. You're better off just keeping Geno because you get out of the contract better. You would only make that move if you can replace your quarterback for less than the $14 million in cap space that is generated.
Correct.
If that's true, then okay, you can consider it. I think they can.
Or you go post
they do.
June 1st. If post June 1st, you'd save $22.5 million.
I don't know if that's possible. And the reason why I don't know if it's possible is because the league year hasn't started yet. And if the league year hasn't started yet, then I don't know if you can use the post June 1st designation.
You'd have to keep them on the roster and the savings wouldn't be as much.
And that's the problem. Because just after the Super Bowl, on what was it, February 18th?
Correct.
He
earns
$12.7 million of his base salary becomes fully guaranteed. And so that 13.8 becomes 1.1.
And his $17.4 million cap hit for 2024 goes up to $30.1 million.
It goes
at that moment.
Yeah.
And then if he stays on even further than that, it goes up to $39.7 million overall.
Not his cap hit. That's his real money. His cap hit, his cap number is going to be $31,200,000 if he plays.
Okay. So,
whatever.
What do you do with Geno? The question really is, what do you do with Geno? Both quarterbacks are off the roster now. Drew Lock is had a 1-year deal. Geno's on the roster, but he's got this big cap hit. Keith and I disagree a little bit on value, on whether or not Geno's worth playing in 2024 for $31.2 million. I would, there's arguments to be made on both sides.
To play 6 games before a rookie takes over. That seems like a terrible use of your cap space.
And none of that, what you just said, is guaranteed or likely, because if Geno's going to be on your roster, I think that you're making a decision as a franchise that whoever you would draft at 16 or drop back a few picks and draft somebody else or pick somebody in the 3rd round is likely not to play too much in 2024 unless they have to. The argument in favor of keeping Geno is you've got continuity for your franchise and your offense. You've got a new system, new scheme coming in, new head coaches. They want stability at that quarterback spot if they can. And he's kind of a win now quarterback. He's probably the premier bridge quarterback in the NFL right now. Is that premier bridge quarterback worth $31 million? That's the nut. Now, if you take the look at that cap number, that $31 million, that's about the 14th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. And is Geno about the 14th best quarterback in the NFL? Yeah, roughly. So is there value there? Yeah, there is value there, but there's also diminishing returns. You talked about the idea that he played better in 2022. All of those things are correct. So this is a value judgment, really. Is Geno worth keeping on your roster at that cap number that would prevent you from adding salary cap to further enhance your roster at other positions and maybe sign Drew Lock for $5 million plus another $4 in incentives to play in 2024, and Geno goes away, and that's a really big iffy thing. And I'm not sure I agree with that strategy. I think that we're better off as a franchise to have Geno come back, even if it's a 1-year deal at the 31, and find that money elsewhere and build the roster in a different way and have stability at the quarterback spot.
There's no stability. There is no stability. You fired your head coach. You're going to have a new head coach. You're going to have a new offensive coordinator. You're going to run a completely different system. There's no stability.
And I think Geno's adaptable as far as being able to play in a few different systems. I think he's a capable guy to do that.
There's no stability either way.
Yeah, but
you don't pay a
team your best shot.
$31 million to go play 6 games.
The only way that it would be better is if your new head coach, say it's Ben Johnson, brought in Jared Goff to play. I mean, otherwise, you said it yourself. Ben Johnson can make anybody look good.
That's the thing.
There's an argument to be made for Geno in that scenario. He can make Geno even better. Better efficiency-wise, make better decisions, get the ball out quicker, all that kind of stuff. Or he can make a guy like Drew Lock look like Geno Smith. I don't know.
Or he can make a rookie, taken at 16, look like a competent quarterback. Right?
It's possible. It's possible. That's a huge decision that's going to have to be made. And that's probably the first one that John Schneider and company is going to have to make in the next probably calendar month.
Weeks. Yeah, they have the 2 to 3 weeks. Because that's when that thing is. If you wait beyond that deadline and his contract becomes guaranteed, you are either trading him or you are keeping him.
Yes, it's true. Because that is very true.
You can't generate enough cap space to make it worthwhile. So you might as well keep him. But if you can cut him and replace him for, I don't know, you can probably re-sign Locke for 5. That's $5 million is an appropriate amount to pay a bridge quarterback to go play 6 games while you get your rookie ready. I think that
it really does come down to strategy. And that's, these are probably big time conversation points in John Schneider's coaching search. Like, what is your philosophy? What is your value? What do you want? What do you need? Yeah. I would lean Geno's going to be on the roster in 2023 or 2024. And I would also slightly lean that number doesn't get adjusted and he plays out for 31.2. And the reason I say that is that I think if he stays and plays, I think that John is going to want the flexibility of not having an extension for Geno. So if you extend Geno another couple of years onto this year and you push those numbers around a little bit and you get that cap hit in 2024 down to $10 million again, you're pushing $20 million out into 2025, 2026. I don't think that John would want to do that.
If you let him play this year, and let's say that it just, you can't make a decision in time, so you go ahead and go like, you know what? We decided to hold on to him because we just weren't in a place where we were ready. Then you're like, okay, he's going to play this year. He's going to make way too much, but fine. You can cut him after the 2024 season and you gain $25 million in cap space by letting him go. And if you try and lower his cap number in 2024, you're just cutting into that.
Yes. Right.
You're just making him harder to cut a year from now.
Right.
So you typically only do that with players whose contracts these are players that you want.
Yes.
You're only going to restructure and push because they're going to be on the team anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
Geno Smith is not that guy.
Yeah. So Geno's either going to play at his number, he's going to get traded, or he's going to get cut. I mean, that could happen anywhere. I get that that's somewhat obvious, but which one of those is the likeliest outcome?
The likeliest outcome, because of that deadline the week after the Super Bowl, I agree with you. I think the most likely outcome is that he's on the roster. He plays out the year at being drastically overpaid, and then disappears.
Yeah.
And the team can make a clean break, and they're just stuck in 1 year of quarterback purgatory because they overvalued his
2023,
Yeah,
Yes.
they overvalued his 2022 season, or the first half of his 2022 season, when they had him sign this contract. That I think is the most likely.
The good news, 2025 and 2026 shape up really nicely. You go look at salary cap for 2025. It's not huge, but it's currently at about $40 million. Without Geno's contract on there, that would go up substantially.
And then $65 million, you remove Jamal Adams from that. It goes up. I just had that.
But 2026, the team cap space is $234 million. So,
and you're going to be at about,
they don't have a lot of contractual
dollars. You're going to be about $120 million as far as current players in 2025. Now,
so you've got a lot of flexibility and that points to you could do something with Geno if you had to. I would say that if you can kind of play this year out and look to 2025 and 2026, where you've got maximum flexibility and Geno's off the roster, that to me is kind of what you're doing. This year to me is kind of a wash anyway. 2024, you got a new system, new coach, new. I think that we should be looking at 2025, 2026. We've got maximum flexibility on the cap. We've got a, obvious transition from Geno Smith to whoever. And anyway, without the other
needs
point,
to make that transition.
Yes,
2024 is about the transition.
Yes,
and that's what the important thing is. You want to talk?
The other important thing is we can generate 40 to however many, $40 million minimum, I think, on the salary cap without Geno in the equation. And then if you take a look at Tyler Lockett's contract, for example, or you take a look at DK Metcalf's contract. Now, you talked about players you want to extend and retain. Those are two players that you might want to do that with. There's some flexibility there. So you could generate another $10, $12 million in cap by adjusting 2 or 3 contracts. So you can get yourself into a situation where you've got $50 to $60 million to spend and Geno on the roster. The point being, you've got enough to really build a roster and a fairly decent one without hurting yourself in 2025, 2026.
So let's look at it. I'm just going to list off the players in that. Jamal Adams, who has barely played the last 2 years and has been very ineffective when he does. You use the post June 1st designation on him, and you get 16.5. Tyler Lockett, you can manipulate about $6 million of cap hit, assuming that you want to keep him. Who wouldn't want to keep him? Metcalf's number is 24. You can drop that considerably by shifting money.
Yeah.
Quandre Diggs, even without the post June 1st, cut him. That's $11 million. He hasn't lived up to that. Will Disley, $7 million.
Correct.
You can do that. And then you get into Brian Monet at 5.4. Talk about easy production to replace. He hasn't played. And then Nick Bellore, 2.8.
Correct.
These are guys that this is easy. That's a lot of money. And this is easy to cut those guys and, cut them loose and replace them with younger, cheaper, hungrier players.
Yeah. Even Jerron Reed. I mean, we all like Jerron Reed, but you can save 4.4 with Jerron as well. Even Draymond Jones, if you needed to.
His cap number is only 5.9 total.
Correct.
That's actually pretty. That's a bargain.
Yeah.
So, although yes, you could cut him for 4.4.
You just have to replace him.
Can you replace him? Can you replace Jerron Reed for $4.4 million?
It depends on the scheme, really. Maybe.
I have a hard time believing that you're going to replace Jerron Reed for $4.4 million.
The interesting thing is we're talking about all these numbers, that's all fine and dandy. But you've got to replace players. So, the money's going to get shifted around. We're going to have the roster. Likely these players are, overvalued. We're going to get players that are more in line with where they should be. but you never know. Depending on free agency, sometimes you overpay too. So it's probably end up being a wash.
That's why I talk about replacing production, because if you cut Brian Monet, your defense doesn't get worse. He did not play.
Yeah,
in 2024. If you cut Jamal Adams, your defense doesn't get worse. He played in 2023, but he played poorly when he played in 2023.
Will Disley, what do you have, like 11 catches?
Yeah, I don't know. But you can cut Jamal Adams and Brian Monet, and those two alone, you're saving yourself $22 million in cap space.
Add Diggs to that, there's $34 million. Add Diggs to that. Quandre Diggs. You add Diggs to that. That's another.
But Diggs didn't play well, but he at least played, and there was some production there. So, but I would say, yeah, if you cut Diggs, that's an extra $11 million right there. So that gets you up to 30. Where were we at? 34, 35. And out of those three players, yes, you need to fill in the roster. But as far as the production that needs to be replaced, you have to replace a guy who played a lot, didn't play well. I don't know. I can replace Diggs and fill in the roster and make my team better with that $36 million pretty damn easily.
Absolutely. You can get good blocking tight end that catches 11 receptions in the NFL for $4 million. You don't have to pay somebody $8 million, $10 million to do that. Mm-hmm. You can find Diggs, replacement level, like a player that played just as well as Diggs, for a quarter of what we paid Diggs.
When they brought Diggs over, when they brought him over from Detroit.
Correct.
Right? He wasn't making much.
Correct.
And he was playing better then than he is now.
Correct.
Now he's making a ton and playing poorly. So it's all, to me, it's not just about, you're not replacing the guy, you're replacing the production. And a lot of these guys that we're talking about replacing, there just wasn't production. You're not replacing anything when you cut them late, so you're not losing anything.
And we're not as bad a shape as like the Saints. The Saints are, $87 million in the red.
Oh, they're in trouble.
Dolphins, $58 million over salary cap.
Mm-hmm.
Chargers, $55 million. So Harbaugh going to be walking into a deficit of $55 million.
Well, at least with the Chargers, they've got some defensive players that they had signed the last few years in free agency, trying to fix that defense that are instantly going to be gone. And it's going to open up some cap room for them because they've missed on some free agent signings, quite a few of them. And so I think that is one that, at least with them, they can get under fairly easily. But still, Seattle's going to get when we say Seattle's going to get under the cap, they're going to get $60 million under the cap. The Chargers are going to get to where they're at, where they need to be. Right. You know what I mean? Like they're not, they're
not going to be players in free agency. Right.
Yeah, they're getting to where they're not in the negative.
So one of the things I want to talk to you about, we're kind of running short on time now, was the idea of who do we want to try to keep and what is it going to cost? Like Leonard Williams. So say we've generated $50 million in effective cap space. Overall it's 60, but we need to have some reserves and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we've got $50 million to play with. Are you bringing back guys like Leonard Williams? Guys are going to be expensive. Do you bring back a Bobby Wagner? Do you bring back Jordan Brooks? Those are probably the guys that, top of the list, maybe even Drew Lock, Damian Lewis. We have enough to bring back the guys that were currently on the roster, but we were also not a very good roster. So what do you do there?
Well, was the roster really not good, or was it that the coaching staff helped them vastly underperform?
Depends on, do you believe John Schneider? We're really close. If we're really close, you try to bring back as many guys as you can.
How much is it going to cost? If Leonard Williams can be signed for $14 million for next year, you do it. Especially if you can keep his cap number at 8 and push money out and you sign him to a 3-year deal. Bobby Wagner, if you're bringing him back, you're bringing him back for 1 year.
Yes.
And
Pro Football Focus had him listed as being available for $4 million 1 year APY.
Do it.
That's a no-brainer for that.
That's a no-brainer. $4 million for a guy like Bobby Wagner.
Even 6 would be acceptable.
Drew Lock as a backup quarterback at $4 million. That's good.
We saw him perform. He won a game for us.
Yeah. Noah Fant would be the interesting one to me because I think he's going to get a major raise and he's going to be making in the $8 or $9 million range, which
I'm not so sure. You might be correct on the pay. Because he's been a guy of diminishing returns now since he was in his rookie season. But he was in an offense that kind of hamstrung him a little bit there on the catches. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. That could be that could be interesting.
Who else are you holding on to?
Well, maybe Jordan Brooks. That's the guy. Now it depends on where it depends on how he's valued in the league and if he needs to rehab his show that he's going to stay at that high level and not get injured again or whatever, and maybe decides on a 1-year deal and it's $5-6 million. I don't think so. I think he ends up getting a two-year deal that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $8-10 million, which I think Seattle would take a long look at as far as
If you're signing Jordan Brooks for $8 million a year, I think you could do it. Because what I've seen as far as projection and comparing him to other linebackers, his age with his production is he's looking at 13. And if you're and with that, now you're taking a risk because that is if you're signing a linebacker, a non-pass rushing linebacker to $13 million a year, he better be healthy and be really productive, which he has been for most of his career.
We've had major discussions on this show about where you allocate your resources. And I would let him go with that. I think that you've constantly got to upgrade your roster. I think they avoided the 5th year option with him for a reason. And I don't know that you want to continue to pay your linebackers and safeties over $10 million a year.
Yeah. The Seahawks have, under Pete Carroll, allocated their cap space, which is a limited resource, to positions that don't necessarily have the largest impact on winning and losing. Safety is one of those. Running back is one of those. Linebacker can be one of those. Especially off the line linebackers. There needs to be a correction. And they need to start spending more on the offensive line and the defensive line because it's football. You have to win in the trenches, and the Seahawks don't at their current makeup.
You're very correct.
And that's why I think Leonard Williams is a high priority re-signing if you can get there. I agree.
And I think Jordan Brooks is diminished. And with a new regime, there's no loyalty. Mm-hmm. It really depends. I mean, it really does depend on.
But I will say this. I think that Jordan Brooks is undervalued by the fan base. He's not Bobby Wagner. You're right. But Bobby Wagner is a first ballot Hall of Famer and one of the best that's ever played the game. Stop comparing him to Bobby Wagner. He is a very good player. Jordan Brooks is.
Jordan Brooks would really benefit from a seriously girthy nose tackle that can take on double teams.
Yep. Which he's never had.
No. Okay. So that's kind of the short list. Damian Lewis was the other one. I thought I would have a little short debate on that. You're kind of the offensive line guy. We saw Damian Lewis come in and really perform well as a rookie, switched over to the left side for the remainder of his career, struggled with some injuries. Now he could, end up getting paid. I mean, he's a decent lineman.
He's decent. Yeah.
He's a starting caliber guy in this league. He's going to make close to $10 million a year, probably.
He played 88.6% of the snaps. That number is way higher than I thought. I thought it was going to be like 62%. And by
And he's
that,
a big
I'm
guy.
like,
He's 332 pounds.
he played 88.6% of the snaps, and he's only 27.
And he was the highest graded lineman on the line this year.
Yeah. I mean,
But
he's a guy that, do I want to retain him? Absolutely. Do I think they have the cap space to pay him? I don't know. But again,
it depends on if you don't retain Jordan Brooks.
Yeah,
if you didn't have to retain
Williams.
Jordan Brooks, you'd have your $10 million a year.
But it comes down to, where are you spending your money?
Mm-hmm.
I would rather spend money on a Damian Lewis and a Leonard Williams than I would on a Jordan Brooks or either of the safeties.
Agreed.
Because commit your resources to where you find what you feel is the most important. I don't believe safety is that important compared to the defensive line. That's my philosophy. You win and lose in the trenches, and the resources need to be applied to help you do that.
I think everyone else that's a free agent, restricted or otherwise, is replaceable level. I don't know that we necessarily need to talk about Darrell Taylor. Darrell Taylor's a fringy guy. Depends on the scheme. He might fit better in a 4-3. So, 4-3 defensive
I don't think anyone's going to
coordinators might look at him. Well, no.
Somebody might look.
No, he's going to come in on a 1-year deal.
Somebody might look at his sacks the first 2 years and be like, "Oh, this guy's got good numbers, whatever." But if you go and watch, like, his sacks come in bunches, and he's pretty bad between them. I think he's going to sign a 1-year deal. I don't think it's going to be for that much. And if a new coaching staff's like, you know what, let's bring him in. That's another player that we don't have to replace. And maybe we can get more out of him with better coaching. I'm okay with them trying, but I'm not paying him.
So I'm
not paying Evan Brown.
We have John Schneider here, who's making decisions. We're going to learn very shortly whether John Schneider has any allegiance at all to Bobby Wagner, or a new coaching scheme, new regime will want to have Bobby Wagner around just because of the leadership. But otherwise, I think Bobby Wagner's done in Seattle.
Yeah.
Love him. Yeah. You know what I mean? Unless he just comes back on a $4 million year, number, and it's a no-brainer for any coaching.
Back at $4 million, even at $5 million, why would you say no? He had a good year. I mean, I get it. Physically, he is limited. He's not the guy he used to be. But his leadership, his savvy, his ability to read stuff, get guys in the right position. He still had 1 million tackles this year. It's such a small part of your overall cap to have such a presence on your team. You bring him back.
I think he could really. He's another guy that could really benefit from a guy in the middle, up front to help.
Oh my God! You imagine if he had like a legitimate nose tackle in front of him. I mean, he had Brandon Mebane for most of their time together. And Mebane was never a great stat compiler, but he worked really hard to keep Seattle's linebackers clean. And Bobby Wagner feasted. And when Mebane moved on, it became pretty apparent that Bobby was slowing down. I honestly think that Mebane had that big of an impact that we didn't notice that Wagner had been slowing down with that knee for a couple of years because he was kept clean by a really good nose tackle.
All right. I think that's pretty good. I mean, we can have a additional roster evaluation kind of looks, and we will, especially as free agency approaches and we talk about the draft and so forth. I recently compiled a schedule for us. And, we've got a coaches show coming up. We're going to do a Senior Bowl preview, both on offense and defense. Then we'll have a review of that. And then, Keith, by February 8th, we are getting into evaluating players for the NFL draft, which is some of our favorite work that we do here on the show, and talking about the combine.
I'm not waiting for February 8th to get started on this. I have
we'll be doing our research and be ready, but
I have started grinding film when I have opportunities, and
I'm doing the same
this
thing.
Time of year.
I know.
This time of year, it's so much fun.
I would say I was talking to Dan briefly after we recorded a show a week ago, after you left, and not on the show, but after we stopped recording. And we were all in agreement. I think we were all in agreement that we like this time of the season, the roster evaluation, the roster building, the decisions in the front office and so forth as being the thing that really kind of is the funnest part of this whole experience for us as not only fans, but doing the show and so forth, because it requires you to use your mind in a way that you're not just watching football and talking about what you saw and reviewing the next game. It's seriously getting into all of the nuts and bolts, what goes behind the scenes, all of the elements that it takes to put a franchise together. And that's super fun. And so we all really enjoy that. Keith had to run. We're about ready to wrap this thing up anyway, so I'm going to let you guys go. Thanks for joining us. You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. This show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platforms as well as our YouTube channel. And when you get there, hit that subscribe button and join us every week for every show. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.